Hi, and welcome to today's webinar with SynZenBe, Fashion PR Partners in Responsibility. I'm Reza Bruner. I'm a reporter and writer with Time Magazine, and I'm excited to be joined today by Kenneth Liu, the co-founder of Chapter 2 Agency, and Charlotte Turner, head of sustainable fashion and textiles at EcoAge. Charlotte and Ken have a wealth of experience in helping businesses and brands on their sustainability journeys, and we're so happy to have them here for this conversation, calling in from 3 different time zones in 3 different countries. So hi, Charlotte and Ken.
Hello.
Hi.
So Ken, I wanted to start with you. Your agency, Chapter 2, focuses on how to do things better, as you've expressed before. Can you explain how that plays out?
Surely. So my company, Chapter 2, was started 4.5 years ago. We really did build it on the vision of my business partner, Clara John. It's turned into, well, she's been my guiding light through this entire thing. So I must give her credit from the jump of this whole conversation to say, she's really built or helped me build Chapter 2 into a format of integrity. We really started with a very simple concept, and that was to support young emerging creatives. A lot of them were our friends. A lot of them were in this industry, and we knew the cards were stacked against them. And in that, we definitely walked into the dawn of the age of Shopify, which gave the power for young designers to really control their own business at this point and be independent and control that growth. And it's changed over the years as we've grown, but really, we started with supporting young emerging creatives. We also thought that we wanted to do something different. Both of us had worked in different PR firms. Both of us have worked in-house for brands. Fashion's a competitively crazy business, and fashion PR can also be kind of crazy and competitive at the same time. And I think we had seen things that we knew were good and things that we knew were bad. And I think we really wanted to build a company culture that was different. Additionally, I think we also selfishly thought that we could change the world. And, I think what we're very present to is that doing PR is a gift. When you do this, you're very passionate about it. You love it. I mean, you clearly sometimes don't do it for the money because I think everybody in PR knows that it's not probably the best paid industry, but you do it because you love it and because you're passionate about what you're talking about. And I think for us, really doing it better meant to put that energy into the right places and really align with the right clients and the right causes. And that's something that's been amazing. I mean, over 4.5 years, things have changed and evolved, which is amazing. That's part of owning a company. We work with big brands now. We can count clients like Nike, Puma. We also work with large celebrities so LeBron, Steve Aoki are clients of ours. And but we still work with small designers. We still really focus on helping young creatives find their voice. We also work with a lot of social impact, and that led us in working with sustainability. I personally lead the sustainability division at my company, and it's an honor to work on projects like this. It's an honor to storytell in this way. And really, I think when you look at what Chapter 2 has really been able to contribute, I think on the projects we work in, we definitely have made fashion a more diverse community. We've definitely made it a more inclusive, but we've also really brought stories that needed to be told to the surface. And that's something I think we're super proud of. And that company culture really goes alongside all our employees at this point, and all the clients that we work on and all the partners that we have. And that's definitely part of the experience. I mean, especially humbled by it. I wake up every day and I love doing this job. I mean, I love being part of this team. And again, I think that hopefully that transcends into every part and every activity that we do.
Awesome. And Charlotte, where Ken works really on the storytelling side, you often get into the details and the nitty-gritty of working with companies to assess things like sustainability status and improve it. So walk us through your work with EcoAge a bit.
So yeah, we've been going for about 10 years now. And like Ken was saying, there was this real need to come and help businesses who weren't necessarily getting the support and services that were really going to benefit them from the kind of existing companies that were out there. And so we were set up with a unique blend of sort of technical with this engaging storytelling. So we have a couple of arms within the business that we do, but they're really intrinsically linked. So we have a kind of technical consultancy side, and then we also have our communications and PR side. And it's really unique in that what we do is, like you said, we will work with companies, primarily fashion, but also textiles. We also work with you know, hotels, we work with stadiums, we do events, for example. And what we'll do is we will get to know them. We will look at what their current business practices are, what market they operate in, what does best practice look like in their industry. Are they kind of meeting best practice standards, or how far away are they? And then how can we actually help them to, you know, really assess everything, come up with a strategy which they can action with our support, come up with things like measurable targets, for example, because, you know, it's all well and good saying that you want to make improvements, but it's really important to make sure that what you're doing is measurable and that it's, you know, realistic whilst being ambitious. So we help them do all of that kind of background work. And then what we do is we work with our communication side to come up with really engaging strategies for engagement, both inside and outside of the company. So we do a lot of work on things like employee engagement, helping to educate them so that they can educate their end customers. Because I think a really, really big component, and my sort of reason for doing everything that I do, my reason for getting out of bed in the morning, is helping to educate people about these topics and these issues, and try to bring a little bit of clarity, because it can be quite confusing and it can be really overwhelming and it can be really scary as well. And particularly, I mean, you know, we work with massive brands doing this. We've worked with, you know, we work with Candiani Denim, we work with Aquafil, but we've also worked with massive retailers like Matches Fashion, huge luxury fashion brands as well. So we look at the kind of a really broad spectrum, but at the same time, I mean, one of my favorite parts of my job is the fact that I do mentoring for emerging and younger designers. And that will incorporate all sorts of things from their, you know, their HR practices, their supply chain practices, their material sourcing, their communications, just trying to help them understand, you know, where they have opportunities to do really good work, and how they can communicate about that in a really kind of effective but transparent and an accurate way. And just really being open about where the challenges are, because I feel like a few years ago people would come out and say, oh, we've done this really snazzy product, we're super sustainable, and then it changed a little bit and people are saying, actually we're doing these things, which is a great improvement, but we're still really struggling in this area, and this is what we plan to try and do, and we want to work with the industry to actually try and overcome these issues. So it's a really interesting time to be, you know, working in this area.
Yeah. Completely. And yeah, you mentioned that finding those opportunities where you can make changes. And especially right now, we're in this moment where almost all businesses are really reassessing their needs, their customers, and their futures. And so it is an incredible opportunity for change for both of you to step in and assist companies as they're crafting these strategies to go forward. So Charlotte, I wanted to start with you. What is the first step that a company or a partner that you work with can or should be taking to begin embedding sustainability specifically into their value chain if they're, you know, in this moment of restructuring or reconsidering?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And it's not as scary as I think it might feel. What we normally would do with our clients is we would do something called a gap analysis, where we actually have a look at all of the different areas of their business. We assess what they're currently doing against best practice. So that could be looking at a global framework which defines best practice. That could be, you know, if they say, right, we want to align what we do with the Sustainable Development Goals because we are really committed to making sure that climate action is at the top of our agenda. It's also important, you know, once you've identified what your performance is, to also understand what are your priorities. You know, there might be companies who say, we don't want to do any work with animal products, or social justice is like at the core of our business. And so it's about, you know, figuring out, this is where we are, these are where our values lie. So this is the action plan that we want to put in place, where we target the biggest risks in our company and the areas where we can have the most positive impact. And you prioritize it that way, rather than trying to do 1,000 things at the same time, which would be terrifying.
Yeah. And then Ken, where does an agency like Chapter 2 then come in that process, and how do you work with a client to move them forward once they've, you know, identified some of these priorities and are shaping that story?
I think one of the first things that I'm really present to is that, you know, again, this is, you know, it's not magic fairy dust that you sprinkle on any brand. And I think that sometimes companies walk into it with that perception that, again, that, you know, this is a hip topic, let me get in with this. But really, I think from a PR perspective, I think it does start in the core of the company. It's got to be something that's ingrained in the company from the beginning. And it also has to have a starting point. I think one thing about sustainability is that it's not easy to start, and it's definitely not easy to maintain. And I think, you know, there's got to be those touch points all along the way, and those benchmarks that are established in the communication structure that, you know, again, mirror what's going on internally in the brand. You cannot get to a place in PR where you're painting one picture over here, but the realities of the situation internally are very much something different. And, you know, people see through that. And I think, you know, so you really look for those core values from the beginning. And then what you know, at Chapter 2, what we try to do is, you know, and it has a lot to do with how we fashioned our name. I mean, there's a very personal story on why we called it Chapter 2. But for me, it's really about putting things in place so it feels like chapters of a story that people want to follow. And I think, you know, a lot of what Charlotte does, I think, is super amazing. And believe, and I've said this to her before, it would be my honor to have like somebody who works and does what Charlotte does at her company, at my company, and that we would grow to that level. And I think, you know, but you really got to look at how complicated the data is, how complicated the processes are, and how to story tell that in a very unique way, but still have it be very authentic to what the company is, and not have it just be the jazz hands of PR trying to sell people on an idea of something. So, you know, and I have, like, we have a really great client named Tommy Bogo, who's actually launching something this week, or this upcoming week. He takes excess packaging from FedEx or Amazon, and he turns it into clothing. And he goes through the experimentation process of really doing that. And it is a format of upcycling, but at the same time, he's able to take something that, you know, again, people know and are very familiar with, and reshape it into that. It comes from a very special place within Tommy. Tommy, this is not the first project Tommy's done on this level. This is not the last project he's done. And it's like his whole model is built on exploration as a designer and as an industrial designer first and foremost. So, you know, again, I think that PR storytelling is so important. And it just, you really have to make sure that you vet the company, you spend the time to learn what they're doing, visit their factories, see it in action, and then be able to go out and communicate what people are doing. So that way you're connected with it, but also then you can make other people connected with it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest parts of that process is identifying the areas that need to improve, and then also the partners that you can work with to make sure that those priorities are on the road to success. Charlotte, what are some of the keys to successfully working together in this ecosystem of sustainability and collaboration in the industry?
I mean, I think really at the core of it, it's sort of letting our barriers down a little bit and releasing some of that competitiveness and secrecy, because I mean, you know, the fashion industry, it's famously secretive. You know, brands build up, you know, great relationships with their suppliers and their supply chains, and they don't necessarily want to share this information, or potentially, you know, they're actually working in conditions where if they were to share this information, they'd be at high risk of having, you know, undercover exposés, things like this. So people are very, very secretive about how it works. And I think that we're improving. We're seeing a lot more initiatives come out where brands are actually really engaging together to try and change things. You have things like the Fashion Pact, for example. You have lots of brands like Burberry is actually a really interesting British brand, which engages in a lot of kind of industry roundtables and actually shares its experience. And the Caring Group is really leading in this. The Caring Group is responsible for the Fashion Pact. You know, we are seeing more organizations come together to collaborate, but I think this secrecy over supply chains is still like a really big challenge. And I think Ken probably experiences that with the work that you do in this area as well.
Yeah, Ken, do you have...
I can definitely, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was going to ask if you have anything to add on that point.
Yes, the thing is, for me, collaboration is definitely, it starts with, it's a journey. It's a journey of research. It's a journey of conversations. And you really got to use the research and the conversations as steering wheels. And to me, it also starts with curiosity, because you hit a lot of dead ends before you find the right partner and before you find the solution to this. It also, I think, personally takes a lot of patience. Nothing in sustainability happens fast, and it definitely never happens overnight. You have a lot of testing and trials, you have a lot of revisions, you have a lot of updates that happen. And the right collaboration is when partners really, when they know what they do, but they're also keen to better the version of what they know. And really, you know, mistakes have to be welcome, because that's the only way you really learn from things. And I think that really, to me, is like at the core of collaboration, and why partnerships, you know, again, need to be present in this space.
Totally. And you mentioned that mistakes are part of it. What are the biggest hurdles or stumbling blocks that you guys have experienced so far, you know, when a brand or company comes to you, especially in this particular sustainability journey? Charlotte?
For me, I think, I mean, well, this I think applies across the whole industry, really. I think it's this lack of consistency, and this lack of consistent language, which means that people, you know, people are always at a completely different stage. And like Ken was saying, curiosity is so important here. There are so many people who come to us who have employees who are really passionate about this, who do their own research, which is brilliant, and who push from where they are within the company to say, actually, we need to make these changes, which is brilliant. But the thing is, because there's so much information and data out there, people are sharing quite inconsistent information, or they might think that something is like super amazing, but actually if you dig deeper into it and you talk with the supplier, for example, and you get more data and information, you know, actually we need to look into this in a bit more detail, because not all is as it seems on the cover. So I think, you know, for me, my again, education is so key, language is so important, and I think that is sort of at the center of things that creates a lot of these challenges. And then I think as well, just being you know, brands can either be completely over ambitious, or they can be really scared of saying anything because they don't want to be called out, or they don't want to make a mistake. And again, as Ken said, this is all part of it. We just need to be really honest about the fact that, you know, we're in an industry creating products that is in itself inherently unsustainable, but we can work together to find ways to, you know, increase our education and try to make better choices, and try to really push innovation and development to get us to a point where we can actually have, you know, businesses which are creating products which have a far lower environmental impact, and ideally have, you know, a positive social impact, for example, or are even, you know, carbon neutral, for example. That's something people are talking about a lot. So I think education, communication, and you know, research and innovation are all things that will help us get over these stumbling blocks.
Yeah.
I also think on my side, because I do work with a lot of partners and a lot of and brands that collaborate with each other, because the other part of our business is definitely, like, we do have luxury designer streetwear, and that is the core of that business. I think some of the things that I see that have been stumbling blocks is definitely, I think setting deadlines for some reason or another seems to be a big stumbling block that everybody seems to get into. They don't understand how difficult it is to get something like this done. And then they set these, like, we're going to open up a factory in Q2 and then it's Q4 and you're like, where's this factory? And it's like, they don't realize that it's going to take that long. I also think, especially something that I see across all of fashion is just getting sucked into the hype and not really being about the substance of this. You know, people are chasing trends, they're not making them, you know, and that happens both in the category of fashion, but also in the category of sustainability. It's just, you know, you see these moments and it's a compromise on integrity, and that's gotta shift. And that's, of course, you're gonna stumble through that if you don't really take ownership of what you're going to do and give it the time to really develop the way that it's supposed to develop, because that is collaboration and partnership, is going through tough times and really coming out of it and looking at it and saying, okay, this is what we learned, not necessarily what we created, but this is what we learned.
Right. So on the flip side of that, what is an example of a success story in this process? Ken?
Oh, it's interesting. I think a lot of the partnerships that I've seen develop definitely happen. I think sometimes, or at least what I'm present to in the sustainability division that I run, is really the collaboration between brands and manufacturers and creating these unique programs. One thing that is happening in sustainability that's really unusual, and again, you see this in fashion as well, is this competitiveness that Charlotte's talking about. Like they're very fixated, clients are very fixated on owning the word sustainability or owning the word circularity. And what it's doing is it's actually preventing people from, you know, working together and coming up with ideas. But when you see it on the brand side, you know, the brands are sometimes, what I don't think is fully realized is that the sustainability is oftentimes coming from the fabric side, it's coming from the manufacturing side, and then it's being pushed into the brand's hands to communicate it externally. So, you know, and you see this, I think G-Star is a really good example of how they collaborate with their partners and how they collaborate with fabric suppliers to bring technology to the forefront to address an issue. And then also on their end, taking people in their network, whether it's Pharrell or other people who can amplify that message and connecting it to the right people. Charlotte, like for example, works with Candiani. Candiani is a great example of collaboration. I mean, it's at the heart and soul. Like Charlotte and I, or actually EcoAge and Chapter 2 worked on a project together with Candiani and Steve Aoki, where we were able to really amplify the concept of sustainable denim and actually open it up to an entire generation who, to be honest with you, in the music experience really wasn't in tune to this. I mean, you know, there were also parts of it that, to be honest with you, Steve wasn't really clear and in tune on. And I think that moment that really happened where, you know, we were on another conference and Steve said, you know, what is greenwashing? And I think it sort of like clicked for him. Like he was like, I've never heard this word before. And then I could just see his face just go to the screen and just start typing in what that was. And he just started, and he just became so present to, wow, this is something that's happening. And I think it's really those moments of education, like Charlotte said, that it's those clicking moments. It's a moment when you bring something into somebody's world and all of a sudden they figure it out and you're like, oh, this is why that we're having an issue. And I think that those are super important in terms of like collaborations that I've seen that have been really successful. Charlotte?
I mean, it's so funny because I was actually going to give the exact same example of Candiani, because again, I think it's exactly what you're saying. It's about just connecting everything. So the fashion supply chain, it is really broken up. You know, people look at the clothes that they buy in the shops, and I don't think there's always this connection about where they're produced and where the textiles are produced and perhaps where the raw materials come from, for example. And we're seeing this rise of sort of ingredient brands. So Candiani, for example, is a great example of that, where it's a textile producer, but it's a brand in its own right as well. And so, for example, they developed this great technology, Cariva, which is a biodegradable elastane, which is perfect for things like skinny jeans, for example. And what they're able to do is exactly what Ken was saying. They're able to work with the brand, who can then work with, let's say, an influencer, connect it with consumers, and you have that entire end-to-end story that's connected and that can be told. Again, all backed up by, you know, evidence, the data, the information that we need, so that we're not greenwashing. But it's this really interesting way of working together across the supply chain to get that message and that education out. So I was thinking the exact same example.
That's so fascinating, and I love hearing you guys talk about all the different pieces as they fit together, because it just reflects how sustainability, you know, it's this buzzword, but it's not, it's just something you can slap on top. And it really goes all the way down to the core of a business, ultimately, if it's going to be a success as a program. So I wanted to talk about actually the greenwashing that Ken mentioned. This is something that's come up a lot in other kinds of conversations in fashion and sustainability in recent years. Charlotte, can you explain a little bit more and just take us back to basically why it's a concern? Imagine I'm Steve Aoki, you know, what do I need to know?
So, I mean, it's a really good question. I think it's interesting because I've been in this sector for quite a long time, and we've seen a huge amount of changes in terms of sort of business behavior, consumer behavior, how we communicate and how brands talk about these topics. And I mean, the first thing is this idea of sustainability as a trend. It's one of my biggest bugbears because a trend you know, suggests something which is going to go away, that it's something that people kind of grasp onto because it's of the moment, but it's not a long-term perspective. So that is, I think, one of where the troubles began, when people started latching onto this as a marketing tool, as something to sell products. And I think Ken can probably feed a lot more into that. But I mean, an issue that we also see is the fact that the word has just been so used now. And again, it comes back to this thing of language. What does it really mean? I mean, you know, there's the Brundtland definition of sustainability, but actually in the context of fashion and textiles, there are so many ways that you can look at it. Like at EcoAge, we have the EcoAge principles, where we look at different elements of environmental management, social justice, and good governance. And for us, there are, you know, it's a myriad of criteria really that businesses should be trying to work to. So I think it's this risk of sort of using this umbrella term for things that we're not able to properly define or evidence. And then as well, you know, with conversations moving on so much, you know, if we look at sustainability, that's about sustaining things. But actually now we're moving towards looking at regeneration. Like, how can we actually regenerate the environment, not just, you know, leave it as it is, but how can we actually improve it? Because we're in such a risky time right now. We really need to be acting to do this. So I just think we need to be very careful about how we communicate. And I think that people are becoming a lot more aware of greenwashing. You know, we've even had brands being called out for supposed illegal marketing because of how they are actually using sustainability as a sales tool and not actually backing up what they're saying. So I mean, it's a really complicated topic, one I could talk about for about 5 hours, so I will spare you that. But a really good question.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned how customers are becoming much more aware and ready to call brands out. And it really does seem like transparency has become a value that end users are interested in, and different players all along the value chain. So Ken, why do you think transparency is important? And how do you encourage a brand, especially in the fashion world, which, as you guys have mentioned, can be somewhat secretive, to incorporate more transparency into their work and into their communications with the rest of the world?
Well, if you really want to talk about something that we could talk about for 5 hours, it's probably going to be the topic of transparency. Because to be honest with you, you don't need a better example of why transparency is important than when you have a pandemic. This crisis has shown everybody where the blind spots are, and how quickly a system can break down when nobody identifies nobody can see those blind spots that exist. So especially within the supply chain, it allows you to, you know, when you have transparency, it allows you to address issues fast. It allows you to communicate about solutions. It also allows you to make adjustments so the process can continue moving forward. Transparency also on the consumer side has a very important aspect of it, especially during a time like this, because, you know, for the first time, everything is stopped. And you have this moment of reflection where people are really looking at the way things are. And, you know, until that moment, we were just running faster and faster and faster, and nobody was looking under the hood of this car. And so, you know, I must credit the younger generation when it comes to transparency, because when they started reading stories around the world of people in India, factories in India shutting down and those compromising the health and safety, this happening in other parts of the country, this happening in America, they opened up Google and Instagram and they just started digging in. And everybody was sitting around the house really digging into issues. And so when you have transparency, it's so important because the customer can see that. And now you have a generation that's coming into this that are looking at it and saying, I want to see where this is made. I want to see from the top to the bottom, who's making decisions. I want to see how it factors into this. And in transparency, communication is a tool. Blockchain is another tool. You know, but it is ultimately going to come down to traceability. And that's where a lot of innovation is really coming down the pipeline. And you will start seeing this become a bigger part of this. Transparency fixes issues. It fixes the questions that people have. Also, you know, again, transparency is something that starts at the top and it's got to be present in every part of the company. You know, it really transcends just taking a photo of some worker, making the clothes and putting it on your Instagram. It really needs to explain what's happening in all aspects. And my hope is that really traceability makes the person who's making the garments, who's designing them, who's sewing it as important as Bella Hadid walking down the runway in that same dress. Like that's where transparency, I think, really has an opportunity here. And again, something that we as publicists are pushing for ever more, because again, we built a business in PR of selling a story, but it's so much better when you can sell a story based on fact.
Okay, absolutely. Charlotte, do you have anything to add to that on transparency?
I mean, I don't think I could put anything better. I completely agree with everything that you just said. It's what people are demanding, and it's, you know, businesses realize it's essential to good business. It makes absolutely no sense to not try to enhance the traceability and transparency of your business. And I really, really hope to see that continue and to grow. Yeah.
And Ken, you noted how people, especially during this pandemic, have more time to really be thinking through and prioritizing what they're buying, what the sort of top to bottom story is of the brands that they are interacting with. Have you seen that the companies you work with are coming to you with an interest in shifting their conversations, in being more open with their client bases?
I think that's a tough answer. This has been a challenge. The pandemic's been a challenging time. I think what we are very present to, and especially when you look at the supply chain, is that this was a global situation. Everybody shut down at the same time. People had to companies had to furlough employees. Companies had to cut back on expenses. And I think, you know, to be honest with you, this level of transparency, for the most part, kind of had to be shielded, because I think if people really saw in essence what was going on, they wouldn't have been too thrilled with it. And I think that, you know, again, we're getting back to a place of transparency, mostly because it's being demanded. And I do think another big part of this has to do with the media. The media really shone a very bright light on what was going on. And you have a lot of reporters, especially the sustainability reporters, that I have to take my hat off to. Like they started that conversation the moment the pandemic happened. And the moment we realized that we were about to stop, they were the ones that really pushed the messaging and said to a lot of or started putting out articles that said, this is happening. We have a chance to restart this sustainably. Let's start making those decisions. And those articles really came out at such a pivotal time, especially with publications like Women's Wear Daily and BOF really came out with stories as board members were sitting in a room making a decision. It was like it was happening that fast, and they would wake up that morning, read the article in BOF, and then go sit in a meeting and say, hey guys, what are we not considering here? I know we've made a decision because we need to financially make a decision, but what are we not considering? What is the human cost of this? What is the brand perception cost of this? And I think that woke up a lot of brands, and it started conversations. I also think, and I'm sure we'll talk about this later, when you deal with the Black Lives Matter movement, that brought up a whole other topic that brands that CEOs and brands had to put themselves front and center. And I think that that's something that, you know, again, it really was this moment of time that we're all in right now that's just going to reshape the way that we're going to move forward in this. And again, a lot of the sustainability, I'm having great sustainability conversations. I'm having tough transparency conversations, that I can tell you.
Yeah. It's really interesting. And yeah, let's go into how your conversations have shifted to some of these more social conscience causes following the US protests this spring and summer, at least in the US where I am. The conversations have been all about how companies can have better conversations around diversity and inclusion. And in the PR space, that's a huge portion of that, is developing these strategies to message to your consumers about those subjects. So I want to go back to you, Ken. Just what are you finding as you're trying to have these conversations and message this as part of these actions right now?
I think right now, this is a complicated time, and this has been a complicated time. It's been the most complicated time to be in public relations, I think, that has ever existed. We're having to play dual roles. We're having to play the educator and the consultant and the one that takes that minute and really looks at what's going on and educate ourselves first and foremost. Before we open our mouth to our client, we have to know what's going on and understand the totality of an issue. Additionally, I think then we're responsible for helping them craft the message. And I think, especially at a time right now, listen, there's no part of fashion that couldn't use a really good conversation about diversity and inclusion at all given junctures of it. I mean, this has been an issue that was largely ignored for a long time, and I'm glad that we were all sitting in our house to have this conversation. That there's no question about that. And, it has to transcend putting a black box up, and it has to transcend putting commitments out there or policy changes. It's got to be also based on transparency and accountability. If you're going to say that you're going to do something and you're not going to do it, then why are you even saying that? And as publicists, we've really now been put in a position to help really move that forward for our clients, and hold them accountable for a lot of things. Because if we're not going to hold them accountable as publicists, then I can tell you their employees are ready to hold them accountable, and that will be in a very public way. And I think that that's just been a big shift in the way that things are. I mean, there's been a lot of shifts, and we'll probably talk about this maybe a little bit later, but, there's been a lot of shifts in sort of how the leadership has to function during times like this. And, I think the dynamics of how, again, a national, now global conversation has really moved us forward, I think is something that is, again, very unique. I mean, everybody wrote off 2020 as being this wasted year. And I really, when I saw that meme come out where it said, is this really that year that we were supposed to have? I honestly think we're there. I think this is a complete change in the establishment. It's a complete change in the way things have been. And this is an opportunity to start again and really start with these core values that we talk a lot about, but never, because we're running around so much, ever get a chance to implement into things.
Absolutely.
Charlotte?
Yeah. No, I agree with that. I think it's so challenging right now. And I agree that I think that it's actually been a really powerful thing that, like you say, we've all sort of just been forced to sort of stay at home, really introspect, think about how things have been working and have these conversations. And I think that with what's been happening this year, so with the pandemic, I think that has been incredibly powerful for showing what happens to the environment when you shut down production and when you think, actually, we're not consuming the way that we did. It's also put a light on the social issues, for example, with the Pay Up campaign, where you have brands who have cancelled orders, who haven't paid for them, where you have, garment factory workers who, are left without employment, who didn't have, the rights they should have had in the first place. And now we're actually seeing even bigger impacts on them because they're not getting paid or they don't have employment. And then you have recently with Black Lives Matter, you have, again, this demand for us to actually look at how we've been doing business and say business as usual is not okay, it's not good enough. And actually, like Ken said, what we need to do is look at the structures and the systems that we have been working within for years and years and actually think, do you know what, these aren't right, they don't work. We need to actually go back to the bare bones and just completely hit reset, because the way things have been, I think it's actually been quite a shock to a lot of people and a lot of businesses to actually sit down and really think about how they've conducted their businesses and how we've sort of gone about saying, oh, you know, business as usual, this is how things need to be. I mean, it really isn't. I think one of the big issues with fashion is that it's based on this construct of constant growth, constant investment return for investors, you know, more, quicker. And we've been saying for years that, you know, this isn't the way that we can work. You know, you can tweak materials as much as you want. You can look at the production facilities that you're using. But if we just focus on constantly growing and making more money and making more products, we're not going to have social justice. We're not going to be able to protect the environment, and we are not going to be able to achieve actual sustainability. So you know, there's so much that we need to address, and I really hope that this year is the catalyst that finally, you know, we always talk about a tipping point coming. I really hope that this is the year.
Yeah, it does feel like that. It feels like there's no going back to normal. You know, things are broken open and we're zooming into video calls from around the world. Why would we ever go back to the sense of being closed off and isolated and not having more open conversations? And so thinking about how that relates to brand strategies going forward and the stories that you tell, what are you thinking the new, you know, normal of communications is going to be as you proceed? And what is your advice in terms of trying to establish a new normal? Ken?
You know, we got so locked into thinking that the way that we did PR was the only way that it would function. You know, maybe email came in and changed that. Maybe Instagram came in and changed that. But this is a fundamental shift. I mean, especially in PR, and we got so locked into thinking that big events, lavish fashion shows, large stores were what was driving consumers to buy products. And therefore, we based our entire communications model around leveraging those moments. And we forgot the storytelling part of this. We completely forgot the storytelling part of it. And, you know, but with that, you know, a new world is opening up, and the aspects of things that are so like that are becoming more important than they have ever been before. You know, I think one of the things that I see shifting in the new norm is, you know, in absence of physical experiences, you're having clearly the podcasts, the videos, the YouTubes, Instagram live stores, all of this happening. And it's really become very crucial for brands to focus and invest on content creation and meaningful content creation, not just like flipping up your phone and doing something. You know, additionally, I think one of the big shifts that you're going to start seeing in communication is really the rise of what I would call the community as opposed to the spokesman. You know, like we were talking about this one before we get on the call, that, you know, again, there is this concept in sustainability that there needs to be a celebrity. There needs to be an Elon Musk. There needs to be somebody, there needs to be a Bill Gates who carries this entire industry into the consciousness of our world. I think with this type of situation, when you have this, you know, really the pandemic and Black Lives Matter sort of converging, what you have right now is the rise of community. Brand companies are going to really pull back and say, okay, we don't need to put this pressure on our CEO to give answers. We need to have those answers come from within. We need to communicate them from within. And then from there, we're responsible to ourselves to to enact those commitments or those promises. Because again, like you look at situations like Everlane, it's like so much was built on Michael. And I have an incredible amount of respect for Michael, but again, everything was so built on him. And now you have this company that, to be honest with you, maybe with or without him, is not going to stand for the same thing. And it's like Everlane really should at its core be a company that was based on a concept and a community that would grow that concept and evolve that concept. And it really allows, you know, community really allows for creation. It allows for, you know, a democracy to exist. It allows for collaboration to exist. It's really something that's different that I think we're going to start seeing as a major trend. Is just this shift away from, I need a superstar CEO who can speak in front of the camera and do their thing and blah, blah, blah. And, you know, again, with transparency, really allowing people to see what's behind that person and really seeing what makes these companies special. And I think from a, you know, again, from a communication perspective, I just think we're in this position because all the other doors are now closing on it. So, you know, again, the focus is becoming a lot more about these important stories that have to really be in the brands, in the brand narrative, and then be as part of the communication, the public relations campaigns.
Absolutely. And Charlotte, when you're working with, leaders of and bosses at different companies, what would your advice to them be, sort of jumping off of Ken's point that we don't need these flashy celebrity CEOs necessarily anymore, but is there something else that they should be focusing on instead?
I think that this idea of community is really, really important that Ken said. I think you really hit the nail on the head there, because like you say, you don't prop up a company on one person. You have a culture from within, and it needs to infiltrate all areas of the business. So we do a lot of work with engaging employees. We help, create sustainability committees within companies. We give the employees sort of agency and ownership over what's happening within the company. We give them the chance to actually vote and say, well, this is where our priorities are. This is what we think that the company needs to be doing. And then, beyond that, it's about recognizing that we're not just pushing products on faceless consumers. This is a global community. These are active citizens. We're not just, thoughtless shoppers. And with something which is really interesting with the pandemic, that we found in the UK, for example, is that essentially what they've said is, the economy's been really impacted by this. Now you need to go out and shop and, support the economy. And again, it's shifting that responsibility to try and fix the economy onto people to buy things that they don't need. And I think that we just need to really understand that we can create really brilliant products and services and partnerships and collaborations, that we can work to do really exciting things. We don't need to push really pointless, bad quality, unsustainable products on people just to make more money. So, I think that's kind of my main thing. And I've seen some really interesting examples happening recently. And, these aren't companies that I work with necessarily, but it just shows, for instance, like the sharing economy is really, really growing, and within that you can still have things like textile innovation. You can still create brilliant products, but you're also just helping to support these communities who are sharing these products. And recently it was very interesting. JW Anderson had done this patchwork knitted cardigan that Harry Styles wore for a concert, and everybody loved it. And so what they did is they actually released the pattern, and they just shared it and said, here is this knitting pattern, go forth and knit. And it's about connecting everybody, from the fiber to the textile manufacturer to the product manufacturer, the brand, the consumer, and the community. And I think as well, what's nice about that is connecting people in a really fun way with how products are made. You want to know how a product is made, try to knit it. I've made my own shoes. It is not easy. I sew my own clothes, and through that I understand exactly what goes into making a product. And I think that we're seeing more bosses actually engage with that and have a bit of fun with that as well. Like, I think the big bosses need to get their hands dirty, get involved, and learn about like the physical properties of the products that they're creating as well. So I just think it's quite a 360 all-rounded knowledge and experience that we're moving towards.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's see. So both of you have worked in this business for quite a while now, and you've seen a lot of shifts over the years in terms of how these types of messages evolve, and the things that consumers are interested in, and the value of transparency and stuff like that. When it comes to sustainability efforts and how fashion and textiles are moving forward, has anything changed recently that really gives you hope? And maybe we've kind of touched on this already, but I'll start with you, Charlotte. What are you most excited about?
Lots of things. I think it's been, my whole focus has been sustainability in fashion for over a decade, and things have changed a lot in that time. I started going to trade shows like Premier Vision, which we discussed before. Years and years and years ago. I started going there over 10 years ago. And if you look at how it was then to how it is now, and the conversations which are happening, both from the main organizers to the actual people who are showcasing there, the change is just so significant. It went from this thing of being like, nobody's interested in, sustainable materials. We don't have them with us because we don't have space on our stand. Whereas now people are realizing, well, if people don't know what we're developing, they're not going to know to ask for it. We're not going to be able to build the market, increase demand, and also hopefully decrease the prices, because the real issue a lot of the time is that, you know, these materials can be more expensive. What we need to do is sort of normalize them in a responsible way. Obviously, you know, we need to look at how we scale these things up. But it's just becoming so much more of an everyday mainstream conversation. You can go to any trade show now and you can have multiple conversations in a day about really exciting new innovations. And I think as well that we're seeing a lot of sort of self-directed education within companies. We're seeing a lot of top-down education and buy-in and push for better practices, which is really promising. And we're just seeing a lot more companies make a really firm public commitment to looking at how they're working and saying, right, okay, we're going to assess how we're working. We're going to be really transparent and honest and humble about where we currently are and where we want to get, and we're going to bring you on this journey with us. So I think I feel hopefully quite positive about the future and more responsible practices from everyone, really.
Yeah. And what about you, Ken? What's giving you hope?
Oh, a lot of things, and I share that. I do share Charlotte's excitement with a lot of the things. I agree with her on the sharing culture. I think that that's something that we're going to start seeing. Again, the health and safety concerns that are being brought up about the sharing culture, we'll find a way to fix that. This will be, you know, we will transcend that. And, you know, like, for example, one of our clients is a brand called The Rotation, and they're you know, in essence, they're the Rent the Runway of streetwear, which streetwear, for the most part, is the most hyper-consuming, you know, hype-driven, like buzz-driven part of the sector. And it's constantly about consuming. And so, you know, to see that the streetwear culture actually embrace a shared closet model is something that I had a lot of hope on. And again, to see the media pick up on it, I think was very good. The other thing that I got really excited about is just the younger generation. I mean, again, really being stuck at home really created a very interesting thing. A lot of young people, this is the first time that they've spent that much time with mom and dad. You know, these are some real conversations that are had now from one generation to another, because remember, before it used to just be less, you know, focus on the phone at dinner and not have these real conversations with your parents. And I think now, like, I think the youth has done a lot to educate the older generation and say, hey, listen, guys, this is messed up because of you, not because of things that we were doing. And I think that has really been a big, you know, or something that's brought a lot of hope, is that, you know, instead of just ignoring the problem or, you know, not participating in the conversation, we've really been able to generate this environment where we'll be able to have that. The other thing that I'm super excited about is just the dismantling of fast fashion. I mean, I'm thrilled to see Boohoo go down, to be honest with you. Like, it's, you know, and I'm thrilled to see, you know, Forever 21 and these companies start going out. This was part of the problem that we were having. And I do think it brings back to what Charlotte is saying, that we're pushing back towards quality. And we're putting that back into the hands of people. I think some really, like Reese Cooper is a really good example of that. Like, he created his collection, and then he's offered the patterns for jackets that he's put on the runway and said, you can make this at home. I'll send you the fabric, I'll send you the pattern, I'll send you the threads, and I'll send you the patches. And I think that, you know, again, this shifting dynamic of leadership in being so open and being part of the solution, as opposed to just ignoring that the problem exists or that it's not our company's problem, I think is something that, again, just gives me a ton of hope, you know, especially in seeing just a younger generation come to the table and say, we're going to fix this. This is not going to happen again. We're going to fix this. And, you know, so that's where my heart is with this.
Yeah. All right, last question. So mostly you've been talking about sustainability. What do you think is the next buzzword, or how can we evolve the concept of sustainability into the next big topic of conversation? Does it maybe envelop something more than that? Maybe it's something within that realm. I don't know. Charlotte, any ideas?
Well, I mean, a few. There have been a lot of new words being used. I mean, circularity is the one which is just everywhere. And carbon neutral as well is what people are really, really talking about now. And I think that it's really good that people are talking about these things and they're having these conversations, but it goes back to what we were saying about greenwashing, which is just making sure that we're using them in the right context, that we're really clear about what they mean, and that when we are setting up, let's say, we're talking about circular systems, that they are truly circular. But I do think that circularity, carbon neutrality, and also regenerative systems, that is what I think people are looking at the moment. Kenny, I don't know if you've got any different thoughts on that.
No, I'm right there with you with those three. It's just, again, I pray that it doesn't replace the word sustainability. I think one of the things that I think we all are very present to in PR is just how easily words get twisted into being so broad speaking, and they lose all the integrity that they were built on. And again, my fear with sustainability, my fear with circularity and these other words is just, we don't hold on to them. I mean, we've tossed the word community around, and I almost feel like we should really make sure that we keep these words sacred. You know, these are important concepts that need to be sacred in terms of the way that we talk about them, you know, consistent in terms of the way that we implement them. Like, there needs to be a protection in this. And again, I don't want to see sustainability become, you know, to be honest with you, the jean shorts of 1990, you know, type of trend that came in. You know, we really do need to make a fundamental change in this world. And it does start with the conversation. It does start with, you know, especially the vocabulary and making sure, you know, again, bringing up what Steve, you know, the word greenwashing should be present in everybody's vocabulary. They should know what that is. You know, there should be consumer facing aspects of sustainability that they can understand. Like, you know, one of the things that we desperately need in sustainability, and something that we talk a lot about, is just a consumer facing mark that somebody can walk up to a product and actually say, okay, I understand how sustainable this is. Whether it's A, B, C, I understand that. And I think that, you know, to me, that's something that I think we definitely need to start trajecting towards, is just simpler formats for people to understand what is, on our end, very complicated processes and models and certifications that try to be explained through the customer, oftentimes through, again, a lot of PR jazz hands. So, you know, again, I really want to see just the substance come back to this. And again, firstly, it was an honor to be on this panel with Charlotte. And again, I have so much respect for what you've done and for what EcoAge done. And I'm honored to be a part of that process with you guys and to be part of this conversation. So.
No, thank you. And thank you both. It's been such an amazing conversation to have. And honestly, I could talk about this all day. It's been so great to hear everyone's thoughts.
Yeah, thank you. I have learned so much from getting to chat with both of you. And, you know, you guys both had a lot of hope and excitement. And I love hearing how this conversation is turning and the sense that we're at this turning point. And I too have a lot of optimism that we can rebuild and begin this process of education, transparency, and sustainable futures together. So thank you so much for joining this webinar.
Thank you.